The Richard Roeper Show is brought to you by AmericanEagle.com Studios. The digital landscape is changing rapidly, and to compete in today's online business environment, you need an experienced partner. Since 1995, AmericanEagle.com has partnered with companies of all sizes offering web design, web development, e-commerce, mobile apps, and digital marketing to drive your overall business's success because they believe that today's online world is your online opportunity. Visit AmericanEagle.com to get started today. That's AmericanEagle.com. AmericanEagle.com. Okay, guys, lots to unpack on the Richard Roeper podcast today. As I'm recording this, it's Thursday morning, and just hours ago, we got word that Gene Hackman has passed away at the age of 95. The Santa Fe, New Mexico County Sheriff's Department said that Mr. Hackman, his wife, Betsy Arakawa, and their dog, one of their dogs actually, were all found in their home. No foul play suspected. Some family members have announced that they suspect it might have been some sort of carbon monoxide leak. We don't know yet, but that is the very sad and tragic news. Gene Hackman, a great actor. We're going to talk about some of his most memorable roles. And I'm going to tell you guys about a conversation we had in Las Vegas, actually. More than 30 years ago, believe it or not. It's interesting, too, because Gene Hackman, by the way, grew up in Danville, Illinois. I'm in Chicago. Danville is the town where Gene Hackman grew up. Did not have a particularly happy childhood. His dad left when he was just a boy. And then Gene was kind of put in the father role, I think, for at least one younger sibling. And then when he was 16, he actually enlisted in the Marines. He talked about that in the past and said it was his way of just escaping that life. And then eventually always wanted to become an actor. And he studied the method acting, eventually made his way out to Los Angeles. And he was part of that generation with, colleagues and friends like Dustin Hoffman and Jack Nicholson and Robert Duvall. They were character actors who became leading men. It was a different time in Hollywood. And there always been we've always had the traditional gorgeous leading men and leading women. And then there's always been room for character actors who become superstars. You can go all the way back to Bette Davis and Humphrey Bogart. But there was a real wave of that in the 60s and 70s where you still had your Paul Newmans and your Robert Redfords, of course, and Warren Beatty's. But then you had all these guys who looked like, as Gene Hackman would say, I look like, like everybody and they became huge stars. Gene Hackman was 41 when he won the Best Actor for playing Popeye Doyle in the great film, The French Connection. He had become pretty well known, fairly famous, maybe, I guess, about half a dozen years before that when he was in Bonnie and Clyde, playing Warren Beatty, Clyde Barrow's brother. One of the interesting things I think about Gene Hackman was he was an actor's actor and actors who became director's actors. Warren Beatty, for example, and Clint Eastwood. And of course, Gene Hackman won his second Oscar Best Supporting Actor for playing the sheriff in Unforgiven, which of course was directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Clint Eastwood as well. So we go back and you look at Gene Hackman's career, and he played, a lot of intimidating figures, authority figures. Sometimes they were corrupt, sometimes they were cops, but he was often, the guy who was in charge when you think about it. Going back to, films like Crimson Tide, where he was the submarine captain, and he was the major general in A Bridge Too Far. He was the Secretary of Defense in No Way Out, the FBI agent in Mississippi Burning. He was the president in Absolute Power. So he often played these authority figures. He had a larger than life persona. He was, first of all, a big guy, about 6'2", 6'3", Gene Hackman. So he filled the screen in more ways than one. And I don't think he would take this as an insult. He was not always about being subtle. He was about really bringing the goods, and you had to come to play if you were going to be in a scene with Gene Hackman, or he was going to wipe the floor with you. You were going to get edged right out of the scene, because as soon as he entered the picture, literally, your eyes were drawn to him. The way he just handled these roles, and then he could do comedy too. Get Shorty, or The Birdcage, Royal Tenenbaums, which had its moments. So he could do so many different types of roles while always kind of looking like, somebody from your hometown, the foreman at the plant, or the fire department chief, or, that one uncle of yours who you really admired, but you were a little bit afraid of. I mean, that was kind of the Gene Hackman persona. And I think, as much as I loved a lot of the films we've talked about, and recognizing that he has 2 Oscars, I think my favorite Gene Hackman performance might be in Hoosiers, where he played Norman Dale, the high school basketball coach. Of course, everybody remembers the famous scene where he has the players measure, the height of the rim and all that kind of stuff in the free throw line, telling them even though they're in this giant, arena now, it's the same as the gym back home. But when you go back and look at that film, it's such a well-crafted film. Barbara Hershey, by the way, is so good in that as well, and all the young actors. And Dennis Hopper has a great supporting role. But the Gene Hackman character that of Norman Dale, he's a guy who has a spotty, troubled past. That's why he's at this small town in Indiana coaching high school because he had been a college level guy and then had gotten into trouble. I think the backstory was his character had actually punched a player at one point. So this was a shot, for the kids, it was the shot at greatness and, based on a true story, of course, Hoosiers. But for his character, it was a shot at redemption. And, he reminded me of that character of so many coaches I played for, because we're talking old school back in the day. I played football, baseball, basketball in the 70s. And some of the coaches, listen, I had some great coaches, but it was a different time. And my high school football coach in practice, if you mess up, he would grab you by the face mask and yank you by the helmet. I had a basketball coach who swore up and down. He'd be smoking cigarettes at halftime and, yelling at us. But at heart, and listen, I'm not saying any of that should fly anymore, but at heart, we learned a lot from these guys. And that was Norman Dale, the coach in Hoosiers. I mentioned Gene Hackman, all these roles, 40 years and nearly 80 films. So can't forget things like the Superman movies, of course, Lex Luthor. But then it was around, gosh, probably the early 2000s where Mr. Hackman decided to retire and just do different things. He wrote some novels. As I mentioned, he and his wife, Betsy, they love Santa Fe. He became a really big aficionado of bicycling, believe it or not, in his older years, Gene Hackman, and he just wanted to have a different kind of life. I think he was one of those actors too who loved what he did and realized he had this incredible body of work. Didn't necessarily need to keep acting. I don't mean financially, but I mean just as a person. It felt like maybe he didn't want to do just the grandpa roles and things like that. So walked away from it and lived his private life. I mentioned that I had the pleasure and the privilege of talking to Gene Hackman. So I'm going to set this up for you guys. This was gosh, believe it or not, late summer 1990. There's a film called Postcards from the Edge. If you get a chance to check it out, you got to watch it. It was a novel by Carrie Fisher, kind of semi-autobiographical novel by the great Carrie Fisher, who then wrote the screen adaptation, which was directed by Mike Nichols. You want to talk about legendary names associated with this movie. Mike Nichols, of course, director of The Graduate and Carnal Knowledge and Catch-22 and Silkwood, Angels in America, on and on it goes. So the film adaptation starred, are you ready for this? Meryl Streep, Shirley MacLaine, Richard Dreyfuss, Gene Hackman, and Dennis Quaid, among others. And they all got together for a press tour in Las Vegas. And I was lucky enough to go out there for like 2 days of interviews. And the reason they did it in Las Vegas, because the movie wasn't set in Vegas, it was mostly a Los Angeles Hollywood story. Shirley MacLaine was doing a one-person review, like a song and dance show at Caesar's Palace at the time. So they brought all the other stars, the director and the screenwriter, Carrie Fisher and Mike Nichols, and as I mentioned, all those actors, all came to Vegas. We all went to Caesar's Palace, and so did select members of the press. I don't know, there were probably 24 reporters, and I was lucky enough to go. And then they just did a series of interviews with the various stars. I remember Meryl Streep was really funny. I remember, well, everybody was great. It was one of the most memorable interviewing experiences of my career. But Gene Hackman was really interesting. Fortunately, the Sun-Times, my home newspaper, we have the archives of everything pretty much in the history of the paper going back for decades. So I can look up stuff because I remember doing the interview, but I didn't remember all the details. So at the time, Gene Hackman was 61 years old. He had just done 11 films in 3 years. The joke at the time, or the conventional wisdom, that Gene Hackman or Michael Caine was going to be in every single movie. And I had forgotten about this, but he had actually had a heart episode just a few months before I talked with him in the summer of 1990. He told me he was vacationing and he had felt chest pains, and then decided to drive to the emergency room in Portland. He was in a little seaport town in Oregon, and he said that the doctors told him if he hadn't come in that day, he would have had a heart attack, and they told him he had to kind of scale back this is a quote from the interview. He said, "I'm not about to retire, but I just can't do several films one right after another." He also told me, "I'm just like everybody else. I always thought I was indestructible and I was going to live forever. Now I know better, so I'm going to enjoy all parts of life as much as I can." Of course, the real blessing is Gene Hackman had more than 30 more years in this life and did a lot of movies after Postcards from the Edge, that which is, he had already had an incredible career, but 2 years after Postcards from the Edge is when he played Little Bill, the sheriff in Unforgiven. That same year, he was in The Firm. And then he went on to make Wyatt Earp and The Quick and the Dead and Crimson Tide and Get Shorty and The Birdcage and Absolute Power. So it's just, a blessing that we had Gene Hackman, the artist and the actor, for so many films. And I also remembered this. I remember this from that experience in Vegas. So when we finished our interview, we were on the top floor, some sort of, a suite that looked down on the pool at the time in at Caesar's Palace. And I think I was his last interview with Gene Hackman for the day or whatever. So we were going to get on the elevator together. So as we're waiting for the elevator and getting on the elevator, just the two of us. No, the publicist said we're still upstairs and just the two of us. And as I mentioned, he's a big kind of 6'2" Marine, intimidating guy. Very friendly though as well. Very everyman. Danville, Illinois. Regular guy, Midwestern guy. But he shook my hand and said, "I'm going to say goodbye to you now, Richard, even though we're going to ride the elevator down together. Because once we get down to the casino floor, because that's where the elevator doors were going to open, he goes, I'm going to move fast because people are going to talk to me and want to talk to me. And I don't mind that." He goes, "But he actually said that, he goes, I have this approachability because everybody thinks they know me." And this was a little bit before the time where people would have been taking out their phones. It was a decade before that. So people would either have if they happened to have a camera because they were on vacation in Vegas, or a slip of paper. He goes, "But they don't want autographs so much. They want to talk to me and they want to tell me their stories." And he goes, "I'll be stuck in there for 45 minutes and I got to go. I got to go to the airport," whatever the case may be. So the elevator gets down to the bottom floor, the doors open, and I've never seen a man walk so fast in my life. Big Gene Hackman with these big strides go. And I was walking behind him and it was very interesting because he's very recognizable. And you could see people kind of turn their heads, but by the time they figured out it was Gene Hackman, he was out the door. And I remember I seeing the doors open to this, the sun dappled Las Vegas afternoon, and then he was gone. But great, great memories of talking to Gene Hackman. And, as I often say, when we talk about these great actors who leave us, the legacy, of course, is the work. And I know a lot of people, same thing happens when musical stars die. People, they'll buy, back in the day, they'd buy albums or CDs or rent movies, and people go, "Why do you do that when someone dies?" It's because you want to remember them. So, I always say I think that's a great thing. So if you want to watch, if you haven't seen, for example, The French Connection, a lot of these films are 50 years old. They're classics. If you haven't seen Hoosiers or The Conversation, such a great film, or of course, Unforgiven, so many films. I think that's the best way always to pay tribute to somebody.
There's a tradition in tournament play. Not talk about the next step until you've climbed the one in front of you. I'm sure going to the state finals is beyond your wildest dreams, so let's just keep it right there. Forget about the crowds, the size of the school, their fancy uniforms, and remember what got you here. Focus on the fundamentals that we've gone over time and time again. And most important, don't get caught up thinking about winning or losing this game. If you put your effort and concentration into playing to your potential, to be the best that you can be, I don't care what the scoreboard says at the end of the game, in my book, we're going to be winners. Okay? All right! Let's go! Let me hear it! Go, 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 go!
We also want to mention this is very tragic news. The story from earlier this week: Michelle Trachtenberg, dead at the age of 39. The New York Times reporting that Michelle Trachtenberg, a touchstone of millennial youth culture, who grew up on screen, and that's really, really true. Of course, people remember her from Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Gossip Girl. Was found dead on Wednesday in Manhattan. She was 39. New York Police Department said in a statement that officers were responding to a 911 call, 911 call, 911 call just after 8 a.m. on Wednesday of this last week, and found her unconscious and unresponsive. I know she had some health problems. I think there was she had, I believe, a kidney transplant, right? but we don't know all the details again, but, so sad. And, as the story mentions, Michelle Trachtenberg started acting at the age of 3 and then was on a Nickelodeon show and on All My Children, did Harriet the Spy, which featured, Rosie O'Donnell. And like a lot of young people who get into acting, it's a double-edged sword. You become famous and you can make money, but you have to grow up fast and there's a lot of pressure. And she even talked about how she felt sexualized in later films like Euro Trip and, films such as there was a film called Beautiful Ohio. She talked a lot about her experiences there, which were not always positive. But for a lot of people, certainly of a certain age, that this was someone who they really, really admired and liked and have certain memories of. So that's, truly, truly tragic. Just 39 years old. I'll tell you what, why don't we take a break? I got a couple of other things I want to talk to you guys about. Also want to pay tribute to one other great who left us this week, and we need to just maybe do a couple of last minute thoughts about you've got the Academy Awards coming up in just a couple of days. So why don't we talk about Portillo's, and I'll talk to you guys on the other side. All right, let's talk about Portillo's. Now, they, of course, are known for their famous Chicago hot dogs with all the freshest and tastiest ingredients, right down to that poppy seed bun. And then, of course, there's the legendary chocolate cake. If you're hearing this right now, that means you are alive and near a computer. That's all you got to be. That's all you need to go to Portillos.com and check out their entire selection of stuff you can get anywhere in these United States of America. Now, if you're blessed enough to live near a Portillo's, then you don't have to worry about getting online. Just go to the store, get the hot dogs, get the Italian beef, the salads, the chicken. They got it great. And then, of course, the chocolate cake, the single greatest item of all chocolate cake items in the history of humanity. You think I'm overstating that? I am not. Go and find out yourself. Go to the store, order online. Unbelievable, the chocolate cake. And they even have a cake shake. They take the cake, they smoosh it into a can with some super cool ingredients. I don't know. They do a bunch of stuff. There's ice cream. And all of a sudden, you got a chocolate cake shake. When it comes out of the blender, it's the best. It is a unique dining experience every time. Go to Portillos.com. Find a location near you. You can order online. Portillos. Portillos.com. I also wanted to mention the great Roberta Flack, legendary Roberta Flack. She was 88 and she died earlier this week in Manhattan, 88 years old. Roberta Flack, of course, people know Killing Me Softly with his song, Feel Like Making Love. She was one of the biggest stars of the 70s, won Grammy Awards, #1 hits. Where Is the Love was, I think, a duet, right, with Donny Hathaway. Killing Me Softly was interesting because it was written, Roberta Flack was covering a song that was actually written by someone who had experienced seeing Don McLean in concert. And that was the feeling that came out of that. The first time ever I saw your face, I believe, first of all, I believe it's one of the most beautiful pop ballads of all time. Just an absolutely gorgeous song. So touching and so moving. And we were talking a little bit earlier about Unforgiven. Clint Eastwood's first directorial effort was a film called Play Misty for Me. I've talked about this before. Clint Eastwood was already a huge star by the time he's, from spaghetti westerns and TV and Dirty Harry and stuff like that. And he started directing. And if you just look at Clint Eastwood's career, if he had never acted ever, just his career as a director is incredible. But he also, obviously has directed himself in many, many, many films. And the first one he directed was called Play Misty for Me. And he played a San Francisco DJ who had a stalker going after him. But there was also a love story with Donna Mills and Clint Eastwood's character, and they played The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face. Check out the film if you want to. You should. It's kind of ahead of its time, kind of the fatal attraction of the 70s. But if you just go on YouTube or do the Google search, just look up The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face and Play Misty for Me. The incredible thing is, guys, the song's about 5 minutes and 10 seconds. And Clint Eastwood had the confidence as a filmmaker to play the entire song while we saw, the very typical romantic montage of the couple as they were, going for a hike and walking on the beach and making love. and it's beautifully done, but it's kind of incredible in this day and age because to think about a 5 minute sequence where the entire song plays, not just a snippet of it, which made it all the more emotionally impactful, I thought. So check that out. Rest in peace to Roberta Flack. Want to mention, of course, the Academy Awards are coming up as I mentioned to you guys. It's a few days before the Oscars right now, so we'll make the segue as best as we can here. I'm doing a live chat. If you're hearing this before Friday, you can Google this and you can actually tune in to see me do a chat with my friends, through my friends and my colleagues at the Chicago Sun-Times. I do this every year. I do about a 15, 20-minute monologue about the Oscars and then take questions. And I've got a ton of questions that people have submitted. And it's like a 40-minute chat. So you can tune into that. And then you could look that up as well on the Sun-Times website. Over the weekend. And then Sunday, of course, I'm here in Chicago. I've been to the Oscars many times, and it was a privilege and a thrill. And I'm more than happy now to cover it from TV because, quite frankly, it's almost easier than being backstage and juggling the interviews and the red carpet stuff and the press conferences and then trying to hear what's going on the telecast. So the Academy Awards are this Sunday, ABC. They're starting an hour earlier than usual, which means 6 p.m. in Chicago, where I'm at. Wherever you're at, you guys know how to do all that. Conan O'Brien is hosting. It's interesting. Jimmy Kimmel has hosted the last few years, and I thought Jimmy did a great job. And I think he felt like, you know what, I'm going to get out while the getting's good because there's so much pressure on that job now. And if you say one wrong thing, and no matter what you do, and you'll see this on X and on other social media, no matter who hosts any award show, within the first 5 minutes, half the people out there are going, "Oh my God, this is hilarious." And at least the other half, probably more, but at least half are going, "This is the worst host ever. These jokes suck. That was inappropriate. That was tasteless. I can't stand this person." You can't win in that job. It's also a very tough job for a host to play to that actual room because you're on stage in front of 2,000 people who are in the industry, including a lot of people for whom this is the most important night of their lives, career-wise. If they win the Academy, being nominated is a huge honor. We all know the cliche and everything. But if they win, it's the first line on their obituary. It's the first line in every tribute, every introduction they're ever going to have. They're an Academy Award winner, so they're not really in the mood to laugh. They're nervous. They're thinking about what they're going to say if they win, how they're going to react if they lose. And it's also just showbiz people who aren't as funny and self-deprecating as they'd like you to believe in a lot of cases. So not necessarily having the greatest sense of humor about themselves. So you have to kind of make fun of show business while also being respectful of show business. That's why I've always thought that TV people like Bob Hope back in the day, of course, did a lot of movies as well, but people knew him from his TV specials. He did a lot of funny movies with Bing Crosby, but he wasn't a great actor. And then Johnny Carson, who hosted for years and eventually Jimmy Kimmel, I think sometimes work better than movie people hosting movie awards because the TV people can be a little irreverent. It's their world, but not completely their world. So they're not burning bridges. I think that usually strikes a good balance. I would have thought 15 years ago, Conan O'Brien would have been a bad idea because Conan's always been really, really smart, really, really funny, but also very cynical. And I thought, kind of chilly in terms of his comedy. It was not the warmest comedy and heavy on that Ivy League, sometimes very smart, but also can be very smug. But I think he's grown, as most people have. If you listen to his podcast, where you see documentaries and things, and he's a different person now, and he's capable of sincerity. Sincerity. I think there was a point where you'd be like, Conan O'Brien, sincerity, they just don't go hand in hand. So I think he can handle it because you have to have your serious moments, especially this year, as we're going to obviously see some tributes and some fundraising efforts in the wake of the tragic fires. I also think that if they're going to talk about that, they'll bring someone else out, maybe, a member or two of Hollywood royalty to talk about that. And that he'll do a monologue. It will be funny. There'll be a couple of little edgy things. I'm sure there'll be a little political commentary. And then the host usually acts as traffic cop the rest of the way. Might do a bit or two. Jimmy did some funny bits in the audience, or they go across the street and all that stuff. But then you just got to be a traffic cop. The show runs itself. It doesn't necessarily even need a host. In terms of the awards, what I do like about this year, guys, is there have been a lot of years in the past where we knew what was going to win Best Picture and what was going to win in all the acting categories. There are still some toss-ups here. My official ballot, which I filled out a few weeks ago, this is not my preferences, by the way, my predictions. I thought The Brutalist was going to win. I now think it's either going to be a Nora or Conclave for Best Picture. Same thing in the acting category. Was it going to be Adrian Brody? I think now I'm leaning towards Timothy Chalamet for A Complete Unknown. I think is going to win. The supporting lead actress, I think still Demi Moore is going to win. I wish and I hope that Fernando Torres wins for I'm Still Here. I think that's the best performance, but it'll be cool if Demi Moore wins. It's a great classic, Hollywood. I don't know if I want to say comeback story, but later in career kind of story. She'll be one of the older actors, not the oldest, to win an Academy Award, and it is a very solid performance. I didn't love the film. The supporting categories are, I think, where you've got your locks at this point: Kieran Culkin for A Real Pain and Zoe Saldana for Amelia Perez. But it's going to be an interesting Oscars. Good luck to you if you tried to do the Beat the Critic contest with me. We'll be back next week with an all-new podcast. I'm sure we'll be recapping the Oscars. And then I got to get back. I know I haven't given you guys any reviews for a while. There's been so much going on. But we will have some fresh reviews on the podcast for you next time around as well. Take care.